is the final of 6 extremely stimulating and engaging talks with academics that are working at the interface, the intersection of the digital and the political. My name is Tim Lynch. I'm the chair of the political science discipline here at the university, and we've been very eager to engage in this very important emerging, I say emerging, it's been around a while, but I think our discipline particularly is waking up to some of the imperatives, some of the research trajectories which have become basic to those working in the digital space. And today's speaker is going to be the best of the 6. We've saved the best till last. And I'll introduce her in a moment. She will speak for 25-30 minutes. We're very keen to take your questions, so store them up until we reach that point. It's my delight to welcome Dr. Aim Sinpeng, who is a lecturer in the Department of Government and International Relations at the University of Sydney. She is also the co-founder of the Sydney Cybersecurity Network and the Thailand coordinator of the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre. She's published widely on Thai politics and is currently working on a project on fake news and politics in Southeast Asia. It's my great delight to welcome Aim to the university and to this series. Thank you, Aim.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thank you for coming, everyone. So how many of you are interested in doing more work with digital media, but just feel like you don't know where to start? Some, okay. Well, thank you for coming. So I think, at the end, also share my personal story of how actually, are you interested? Maybe I will share now. So I was expecting a baby, and that's not how you would think someone embarks on a digital media research, but that was how it was for me. I used to be a very heavy field researcher, where I spent months in the field I studied protests in Southeast Asia and civil society. And I found myself thinking, well, what am I going to do? I can't do this kind of research, heavy fieldwork research anymore, right? And at that time, I specialized in Southeast Asian politics. So at that time, the whole region just went through a massive digital revolution. And I'm always on Facebook. So I thought, well, why don't I study this since I'm already on it so much? And that's actually how it began. It was a personal sort of, how am I going to cope as a researcher now that I can't do all these long fieldworks? But how else can we understand society and the way they interact with politics through the online space? And there isn't, just like any other issues with Southeast Asia, it's always catching up to what has been happening in North America or Europe. But the great thing about Southeast Asia is that it is, even today, actually the most social media active region in the world, measured by the number of hours people spend online. Guess who's the most social media active country in the region? You know, the Philippines. They love to talk all the time. And the funny thing about the Philippines also, and lots of Filipinos tell me, part of the reason why Filipinos spend at least 4 hours a day just on social media, this is not including internet, just on social media, it's partly because the internet is slow. It's actually, and you know this, right, Raphael? It has the slowest internet speed also in the region, so it takes a while to get to the image, you know. So people end up, but it's partly it's partly a technical problem, an infrastructure problem, but also a social thing, right? Like they love to chat and what have you. But actually, the top 10 countries, according to We Are Social, which is like an annual survey around the world about how people use social media, amongst the top 10, 5 of the countries are in the region of spending so much time on social media. So this is why I thought it was a great way into understanding how it impacts politics in a region where people are increasingly online. And this year and next year is going to mark the biggest shift in digital media penetration in the region. So it's for the first time, the region would actually have what we could call a critical mass scale, meaning at least 50% of the population now would have internet access. And social media penetration is about 100% of people with internet access. So I think this is the most critical time, actually, to study social media in relations to politics at a time when entire societies in the region are actually finally coming on board in a massive critical scale, where we're now between 40 to 60% penetration. So what I was interested in was really simple, was how was social media actually used in elections? And this seemed like a simple question, but it's actually not straightforward in a region that's often dominated by client-patron relations. People often, in the Philippines, for example, dynasty politics. How does social media change all of that? And in particular, the region is also full of non-democratic regimes. These are regimes that are not democratic, but do have competitive elections, right? So it's not just social media use in elections, but elections that are in largely authoritarian settings as well, which presents all kinds of interesting questions. So the talk today will focus on data that I've got from 4 elections in the region: Philippines 2016, Malaysia 2018, Thailand, and Indonesia this year. And I will focus a bit more on talking about the Philippines and Thailand, because this is where I spend much of my research effort on these 2 cases. So I look at the official campaign period. So I look at how social media has been used by politicians, most major political candidates, during the official campaign period time. And I did this looking at 2 different types of data. One was a survey of respondents during election campaign, or in some cases immediately after, or raw extraction of Facebook data that was analyzed during the same period. So it works out to be about 1,000 respondents per each survey, and usually the entire data set of all the activities of all the major candidates in each election. So we're talking about millions at this point. And I wanted to focus the perspective of social media use from the voter and from the politician. So it's the candidate-voter relationships during the campaign period. So what did I find, right? So first, I want to know who are most active online during election campaign. What kind of demographics are we talking about? And it's not super surprising. They're young, but they're quite educated, especially university educated, right? And quite urban. That's also not surprising. There's this rural-urban divide and the age divide in terms of people who are digitally active, but that gap is closing down rapidly as penetration is moved beyond 50%. But the educated part strikes me as something important, right? When we think about digital inequalities, who are the most likely people to be politically active in general, according to a wide range of studies that we have around the world? They're maybe not young, but educated and probably urban and probably higher skill, right? So I want to see whether social media actually tries to reduce that gap by inviting people who are maybe from the lower socioeconomics or less educated into the participation area, because now the digital media completely removes the cost of political participation in general, right? You don't have to go anywhere. Now you can participate. So does that reduce the gap or does it not? And from this, it doesn't seem that it has closed in the demographic gaps that well. So that's across from 4 cases. Income. I don't have the Thailand data here that I'm still working on. It needs a bit of cleanup. So income, the middle class, of course, are the most active. But you're starting to see in countries like the Philippines a higher participation from the lower class, lower and lower middle income in politics, much more than they ever have been before. So it looks like from the income perspective, it's the lower middle that are much more active than the better off, right? So that gives some suggestion that this is some kind of closing the digital divide gap, right? People who are less well off are now participating. So I think the picture that we see here is that it is the less wealthy people who actually go to university. So what happened with the economic development in the region in the past, basically generation, was this, uplifting people from poverty into lower middle class, where parents are fighting hard to make sure their kids go to university, but they're not necessarily that well off yet. They're just struggling, right? And they're young, and these are the people who are most politically engaged on social media in these 4 countries. Other things that I find are interesting and not necessarily a broad regional trend are things like how important was actually Facebook to their voting preference, right? So was Facebook important in whom they decide to vote for, right? So in the Philippines and Thailand, it was very influential, but the important thing was it was influential because of influence from their close relations. Social media is mitigating relationships that are a bit weaker, but actually, when it comes to voting decision into Philippines and Thailand, it's mitigating relationships of close people who probably you don't need the social media for. You can just call them or have a physical interaction. But the Philippine case is particularly acute for the overseas Filipino workers, which that would explain. They're overseas, but also they're the main provider in the family back home. In Malaysia, it's less important, and the same thing with Indonesia. But both Indonesia as well, families and close relations are the ones that are influencing members whom to vote for. So it's just kind of strange to think about why social media matters to your voting choice, and that influence actually comes from your friends and families, people that you probably could have asked, but it's been mitigated online. The other question we asked was to look at trust. And this is about trust in information relating to the election from Facebook. So the trust is sometimes in these cases, but when I actually cross-reference with the level of education, it's actually an inverse relationship, meaning the less educated you are, the more likely you're actually going to trust information from Facebook about the election. And this is particularly acute in the Philippines and Indonesia, so lower income countries. The other issue that we wanted to figure out was, what did they actually do on social media? Assume that they're politically engaged, but we don't know what that engagement looks like, because the online engagement is very different from offline engagement. So there are 2 themes that emerge. You either go online to find out more information about candidates, or you go online to mobilize support for your preferred candidate. And overwhelmingly, we find that it's largely to get information. But in the case of the Philippines, and this is very strong, if you are a supporter of Duterte, that you're there to mobilize support for him. So they've already made up their mind before the campaign period starts, they're voting for him. And that's all they did online. So if you're a Duterte voter, you're only going online to mobilize support for him. You're not going online to read about any other candidates or about the election. Right? This wasn't so pronounced in the other 2 cases. The other correlation we find strong was online-offline engagement. So if you also attend offline rallies, you're very, very likely to be active online. So there's a strong connection between being active online and being active online, which is great to see, because you often think that they're quite disconnected. I'm going to skip this. So I wanted to look closer into the Philippines, because of Duterte being this outlier candidate who won, but also he was populist, and we wanted to figure out whether a particular kind of engagement online matters to mobilization support, right? So, starting with Trump, there's 3 different models of online campaigning. One was about being active, right? So the more active of a candidate you are, the more likely you're going to get followers, right? Because you're always posting and you're always doing something online. So it's something new, material you see. This is probably how they get people to engage. The other model is actually called the populist communication style. So it doesn't matter how often you post or how little you post or engage. It's about how you talk online. If you're using a populist language or populist materials, things that could go viral, then you're likely to get more engagement because you're using politically incorrect language, you swear a lot online, or you're using verbials that basically evoke emotions, either positive or negative from people. And that is causing the engagement level to go up, not because you're active, right? So you don't even have to be active. You just have to sound a bit crazy and you're going viral, right? Because we all know in the recent study from MIT, which is the single largest study on interactions on social media, that false information travels 7 times faster than truth information. And it's largely because of the sense of novelty, right? People feel like they're reading something new, even though it's complete crazy, and you're far more likely to share, which is engagement, right? It drives up engagement because it's novel. And so because Duterte is populist, maybe that's why he was so popular online. Other was talking about socioeconomics and demographics issue, and people of certain groups or age are much more likely to be engaged. So candidates who are targeting the groups of people that are more social media active are more likely to get more engagement. So it's just about targeting your audience properly, right? It's priming, right? If you know the active people are young, are urban, they're largely concentrated in these areas, you know, this is where you spend the Facebook ad money, right? And you're spending all your campaign effort. So what did we find? So I do these studies with Professor Aris Uruguay from the University of Philippines, Diliman. And we find that with Duterte supporter, he was, on all accounts, the worst campaigner ever on social media. He barely posted. And actually, so these are the 5 candidates we look at during the campaign period, the 5 major candidates. And at the beginning of the campaign, they all had somewhat equal chance to win. It wasn't clear who was going to win. That kind of came like last minute and won. So we found that his supporters are fundamentally distinct from any other supporters of other candidates. They were the most committed, the most zealous advocates of his cause, and most engaged with non-supporters. All right, so we want to figure out, yes, Duterte supporters are the most active on social media. Is it because he's populist? Is it because they're from certain demographics? Or is it because Duterte was the most active in his campaigning? And as I mentioned earlier, he was terrible on social media. He barely posts. So during that campaign period, about 4 months, he only posted 73 times. His rivals posted at least 500 times. That's way more active than he ever did. Second, he mostly posted in third person, which means it says, sir, like it wasn't written by him. Right, sir, so-and-so, Duterte did this, and he used a he a lot. It sounded clearly not written by him, but also sounded quite formal. It didn't capture his otherwise very vocal and quite vulgar language that you often see him on TV, on YouTube, or on the other. Like, he has the best material to be the most viral populist candidate. He didn't use any of it. 0 on social media during election time, right? He was barely engaged, didn't use any kind of YouTube videos that went viral, nothing. No memes, no premium content, no fancy video, no crafted PR campaign, nothing. So what's going on? He's not even a populist on social media. He could have easily just post one of the viral videos that he was on and it would just go viral, but he didn't. Boring, it was not engaging, not active. It was like, I was actually shocked to be reading his social media posts. Like something bland like this, I will provide strong leadership to end this country's disorder. Like, that's not what people think Duterte talks about, right? He's cursing at the Pope. I mean, like, you know, he admitted to murder on live television. That's Duterte, right? And we're reading this, and you're like, who wrote this? This is not him. I don't know what happened to this guy. But somehow, and look at his, for example, one of his rivals, right? She was always rebranding her background on Facebook. She was always putting up like nice photos. Like she's also as old as him, but she was trying to appeal to young people because that's the people who are most active online, right? Kept having photos with young people doing like cool things, right? She also write books for young readers. So, she tried really hard. And it didn't, other Grace Poe is what you would think of Hillary Clinton, very polished, very well manicured, well spoken, like some, like how everywhere she talks about, she would hashtag me, add me, tweet to me, like, having the right kind of PR media didn't work, right? What you end up seeing is, the engagement level of Duterte is like massively higher for posting so little, right, than any of his rivals. So at this point, two things happening. One, how you campaign on social media doesn't matter. Or two, he's buying followers, right? This is you just go buy 1,000 followers for $7, and as we know, the Philippines is home to influence industry. That's where the influence industry is based. Filipinos are lower wage, speak English, right? It's perfect, right? You could have probably just bought it. So we're now at the point where we're thinking, either we really misunderstood how social media campaigning should be working, or we're in the trolling territory. Fake news, disinformation, all of that stuff. But given what we know offline about how popular Duterte was, there obviously has to be genuine grassroots support for him. But looking at the data alone, we can't tell if these comments were written by someone who's paid or not paid. We really couldn't. And we still can't to this day, right? So at this point, we're scratching our heads, and how did he get so many likes? So likes can be bought, we all know, but like he really got a lot. It's just he went up a lot in the last, couple months before Red. The campaign ends. Everything he's written, the few times he actually posted something boring, was shared on average, 11,000 times. So either, you have an army of cyber supporters who are getting paid to like share stuff or like, or he really has a lot of people that were rooting for him. So the problem we face is we don't know how to tell the difference, because it cannot be told just looking at digital data. This is when you need to go back to the field and ask people. So we use the combination of interviews and the online surveys to figure out how much we can say that his supporters were genuine and how much is fabricated, right? And at that same time, there's lots of report coming out after the election that maybe he had met up with the guy from Cambridge Analytica. So it's sort of like this big story building up of this weaponization of elections. So there's already a lot of skeptics about, people who basically don't like him are skeptical that his support was genuine, and the people who love him and worship him and would explain why, even 3 years after he was elected, he still has an approval rating of 80% today, right? Trump can't even do that, not even close, right? That's really high. It's because he really has a lot of people that voted for him. So what we could find, I'm just going through really quickly, was, well, we know from the surveys that Duterte voters were different, that they were largely middle class, university educated. The poorer they are, the more likely they're going to vote for Duterte. But they also early voters. They decided months in advance already. So by the time the official campaign period started, they were the only group of supporters who went online just to talk about how much they love him. Whereas supporters of the other candidates used social media, used Facebook during campaigning periods trying to figure out who they were going to vote for. That was not the case, right, for his supporters. So they went there to basically talk about how great he was, brush up on the critics, and they're most politically active offline. So there's a very, very strong connection. If you're a Duterte supporter, you're far more likely than any other supporters to already have been engaging offline and online, and already decided in advance they were going to vote for him. This is not the case for others. They also see Facebook as very important, regardless of their background. Equals, Duterte voters love Facebook. And more importantly, this is basically a graph where I'm doing a bit of network analysis to try to figure out what do Duterte supporters do online. And it just basically shows that they were the only one, and I can explain this a little bit more, they were the only one out of all the supporters candidates to go out of their way to defend him on pages of other candidates, and vice versa. So if other candidates' supporters come to Duterte's page, complain about him, immediately defend him, and they also defend him somewhere else, which makes Duterte supporters most central in the entire campaign period in terms of networks, right? So basically, Facebook released statistics that 61% of all communications on Facebook in the Philippines was about Duterte. So his supporters were so good at talking about Duterte everywhere all the time that everyone's talking about Duterte for good or bad. That means virality, that means really high engagement, irrespective of what Duterte actually did on his social media campaign. So he did nothing, basically. It was his supporters who did all the work. And I'll just skip that. So in summary, right, Duterte supporters, so why was Duterte most successful online during their election campaign? It wasn't because he was active. It wasn't even because he was populist. It wasn't because he was targeting the demographics that were active. It was because he had the most committed supporters across all the candidates that were going out there, defending him, actively promoting him, mobilizing for him all the time, online, offline, online, offline. And that's the kind of dedication you need to win an election on the internet, right? On social media. And it brings new light into understanding how do you have a successful social media campaign, because every politician now is doing social media campaign, but we still don't have a recipe of success, right? We have these three models that were successful in Europe and North America, but they don't work in the Philippines. Speaking of not working in the Philippines, it also doesn't work in Thailand, right? So in Thailand, really interesting case. I don't even know how much time I have, but I'll be quite quick. So Thailand was in dictatorship for 5 years, which means no political party was allowed at all. It's illegal, right? So how do you even campaign when you can't even have a party? And this is the fascinating thing about the Thai election in March 2019, is because there was a new party that emerged out of dictatorship, for one, and that party got 6 million votes. Thailand has 67 million in population. So they became the third largest political party in the country, having 3 weeks of campaign in dictatorship. The only explanation is, and this party is called Future Forward Party. And the only explanation would be, it seemed to us that the people who voted for him, vote for this party, were young, urban, upper middle class, online people. So I went home thinking this has to be the successful social media story that we're after, right? How can a party coming out of complete dictatorship with actually no ability to campaign, was only given 3 weeks of campaign and win 6 million votes? It's just impossible, right? How do you do that? So I went in it thinking they have to say social media got us these votes. But I was wrong, right? So first, I look at the aggregate data of all the major parties. There was actually 81 parties, to be quite frank. So if anytime there's a dictatorship and then they said, oh, election's coming, immediately you get like this onslaught of parties because they have been suppressed for so many years, not being able to actually have a say. So these are the top 8, and just looking the number of, just looking at engagement level again, Future Forward came third. These were the 2 main parties that existed before. So they weren't, the most engaging party by any means, but they still did really well considering they're completely new. Like there was no party before. And oh, I might not have in this slide. So I end up, yeah, I didn't. So I look at some of the aggregates and thinking, okay, well, they're doing quite well on social media, but social media sphere in Thailand is still quite, this is what an echo chamber would look like online. So do supporters from different parties talk to each other or not? And basically they don't. So very polarized political environment. How does the new party succeed? I'm sorry, I don't have those slides here, but I can talk about it. So I went in and interviewed 50 MPs, constituents MPs, because I thought if MPs were, if politicians were going to face the biggest struggle, it would be at the constituency level. Because if social media could bridge a gap between, having nobody knows them and going viral, it's going to be somewhere at the national level, not at the local level. So but the elections actually show that this party was able to get 30 seats, right, at the constituency level. So which means that they had to use some kind of combination of social media things going viral and actually talking to people. So I went and interviewed, 50 MPs. I interviewed everybody in the social media campaign. And by everybody, I meant 4 people, right? Mostly unpaid. Because they had no money, they had no time, they were just relying on interns and unpaid new political party, 20 euro something, who create basically the entire digital media scene for a party that nobody even heard of, right? And it's a funny kind of story because I wanted this room with no windows, and there was 2 mattresses on the floor, and I said, "Hi, I'm here to meet the social media team," and they're like, "That will be us." That's his table, very messy, and a few paper clips on the board, and 2 beds, and I said, okay, and that was it, right? There was 4 guys, 20, 21, 22, 19, and 25, and that's the social media / media, because they just have the media team, which is apparently doing social media part-time. The rest of the time they spend, designing pamphlets and campaign posters. And they said, yeah, that would be us. And I said, oh, okay, so tell me about, so he said, everybody said that we were successful in social media, but it's not. So when I went and talked to the MPs that had to actually campaign, they actually said it wasn't social media, mostly. It was them knocking on the door every single day for 10 hours a day for that 4 weeks that they had. And I thought, but knocking on a door, are you saying that other candidates didn't knock on doors? And they said, well, because we are the only party that don't use vote buying. So the party was very against vote buying and the use of vote brokers, which means, using local influencers to buy votes for you, which is very common in Southeast Asia. Very, very, very common. When I was a kid, you get money. When I was growing up, we would get like rice cookers, which is great because otherwise you didn't have a rice cooker. And then as time went on, they would like throw a big party in the village and you would come and it would be thrown by a politician, and you know what I'm talking about. And it would be, and it would, and you would want to, this is how you buy influence. But this party was very against it. So how do you campaign? There's only 2 ways. You either go to people's house or you go online, and they had to do both. But the constituency candidates were the ones, going to door to door, talking to people, and then they found out that these people hadn't seen a real MP in decades. They don't even know what the MPs, they don't come. They never come because they just give the money to the local village heads, and these village heads go and tell them, look, vote for this guy, here's some money. And because the relationships you have in a village, you pretty much know if this village can turn up 300 votes or not, because you count on the people you count on. That's how vote brokerage works. This party was against it, so they had to go door to door, and that door to door was the reason. Plus the social media campaign that was done by the 4 guys in the office was the reason why this party was a huge success. And I thought that was such a great story to add to the Philippine case, because it says so much about what we understand of social media campaigning, right? We think that social media campaigning could replace offline campaigning, and it's not true, not even close, right? It can only amplify it. So the most important thing that candidates can do is whatever they can to create the offline base of supporter first, and once they go online, they would do all the job for you without you having to do much work. And I think that's such a great story, because we often consume by how much Trump tweets and how much so-and-so politician says online. We forget that you still need to see people, to build that connection. And the social media stuff can only amplify physical relationships, right? Which is what explains why voters trust information coming from their families and friends about who to vote for, but it's the information they find on social media, right? So I think that's all I have for today.